Eye Samurai, a brand new Netflix original anime which has become more than just a great animation, but overall is just a great series in general. Hello everyone and welcome to All Things Watched, and in this episode we are going to talk about episode 7 of Blue Eye Samurai, which was titled Nothing Broken. And so, excuse me, this episode picks up right where the previous episode left off with, of course, Ringo. And Ringo now has Tigan and Mizu. And of course, the last episode did not really reveal that it was Ringo, but it was a pretty good assumption, pretty safe assumption to assume that it was Ringo, especially with the audio that they had going with the commentating or the narration of Ringo saying, "An apprentice never goes or strays too far from his master." And so here you see Ringo with Tigan and Mizu on his wagon that he's towing, and he's knocking on the door of the sword father. So it's very interesting that he took the both of them back here. I figured he would take Mitsu, and I figured he would take Tigan as well, but it's just a really great callback to earlier in the series when we were getting all these flashbacks with Mizu and Swordfather, and this might actually be the very first time that they were actually reunited. I don't remember Mizu and Swordfather, being together in the present day. So it was really cool to see him when he opened the door, and is also really cool now that he's also going to end up meeting Tigan and of course Ringo as well. In the meantime, Holloway, what's his name? Holloway, or whatever his name is, one of the White Devils, is now preparing to launch his attack on the Shogun, and as you can see, the temple or the fortress that he was hiding out in is actually now in the background. This is the same fortress, the same hideout that Mizu tried to infiltrate and of course obviously failed, but not because she's not talented. She made it further than what most would. It's just she was just kept getting hit with different challenges. She kept getting hit with different lines of defense, and she kept getting winded and beaten and battered, and by the time she actually got up to, or Fowler, that's his name, sorry, by the time she actually got up to Fowler, she was already tired and beat out, exhausted, and she didn't really stand a chance. And not only that, but Fowler is a coward, so he was using a gun and she was using a sword. And so it's just really cool to see, it's really cool to see him now gathering the troops. We know he's going to make, excuse me, it looks like he's going to make his assault now on I believe it's the Shogun they're talking about that they're going to end up killing or infiltrating. I mean, like they're going to take over the Shogun. But it also shows now that Fowler is in a powerful enough position where he's not afraid to leave his fortress anymore, and he's not afraid to let his guard down. And so we get a really cool montage then of different scenes of Fowler and the other and his partner, his Japanese partners, traveling the lands, and they're like stopping into different brothels, and they're taking over different territories. And it was just a really cool little montage where we actually got to see where they were on the map and stuff like that, and they were actually showing, showing the locations that they were taking over, and it was just a really cool montage of scenes. And then we get a beautiful overarching shot of, I would assume that this must be the Shogun or the Shogun's territory. This is, I guess, the land or the area in which Fowler will eventually attack and want to take over. This is also where Akemi is now. Akemi was brought back here because she is now going to be forced to continue on with the marriage to sort of fortify that alliance that the Shogun and the other family basically had set up at the very beginning of the series and of the very beginning of the season. And we get this really beautiful shot here of Akemi, and she finds this little bird which seems to be very colorful, almost very tropical, and she sees the bird here caged in, and she just has this beautiful moment where she really has a lot of sympathy and empathy for the bird, because to some degree this sort of represents her and her life. She feels very trapped and very caged into this lifestyle of almost having no freedom or no free will and not being able to make her own decisions. So she's sort of caged in this life that she never really even wanted. She was just kind of born into it. Excuse me. And so it was very symbolic, and of course, Akemi ends up freeing the bird and letting the bird fly free, which was, sort of symbolic to her as well when she ran away and took off, and Saki ended up going with her. If you remember all the way back, I believe it was the second episode when, yeah, I think it was the second episode when her and Saki end up leaving. She went out to search for Tigan, and it was just, this scene here is just very symbolic because it shows everything that Akemi has went through, and now she sees it in this bird, and so she sets it free, and then we hit this, quite a devastating scene where the bird ends up getting shot down, and it's shot down by the person and the person's family who she is about to marry into. The person that she's marrying, the husband, ends up having this bird killed, and then of course she doesn't really understand why. She doesn't understand why he would want to hurt her in this way, especially if they're going to be married. And what we learn as this episode unfolds is that there's a lot of troublesome in that other family. The family that she's about to marry into seems to be they seem to be stable and powerful, but they're very cutthroat type people. They're not afraid to hurt people. They're not afraid to backstab. They're not afraid of showing their dominance, and this is sort of an act of dominance that that family was sort of showing over Kimmy, not just destroying the bird, but also to some degree destroying her freedom. And of course, we learn later in the episode that it was actually his mother that sort of is in control of a lot of this, very, a lot of this evil and a lot of these very poor, she just has a very poor attitude and very negative and oppressive personality, I guess you could say. And so Akemi, of course, is very upset, and so she ends up going back to her room, and she really doesn't see any way out of this. And you can tell even just from the facial expressions on Akemi, even though this is an anime, you can tell her, sort of her despair, her loss, her she just feels like the whole world is about to be over. She had that freedom. She got a taste of freedom and independence, and she really liked it. She don't want to go back. And then, of course, by the time she actually gets up to her room, she overlooks the balcony, and she actually overhangs it to the point where, is sort of alluding to the idea where she wants to commit suicide, but she never actually does. And then, of course, Saki ends up coming in when he sees this. And I really liked how they treated Saki in this episode because, we sort of always, they sort of always showed us their relationship in the sense of he always looked out for her and he always cared for her and that sort of thing. But I feel like in this episode they really exploited that and they really showed us just how much he really cares about her because, he comes in and he's like, do you really, want to do that? Would you really want to commit suicide? And, he says, is your life really that bad to the point where you would choose death? And Akemi kind of opens up to him. She really does confide in him, and she tells him, well, she is very unhappy. She's not satisfied with this life, and maybe death is the answer, and maybe from Akemi's perspective, death is the only way out. And I really liked their that little banter that they had back and forth, and it was really cool to see that and actually see Saki really open up to Akemi as well. He really tells her, that he tried his best to train her in this life and whatnot, and so everything that he says to her, combined with something that somebody else says to her later on, really drives Akemi's character forward in this episode. By the time we get to the end, and then we see Akemi and Saki actually sit down and they start playing this traditional Japanese board game. And once again, it was a very good, they had really a lot of good writing, great dialogue here, where they are, he's basically explaining to her, once again, everything that he's trained her for. He basically told her that he sort of, that he can train her in a way to, make her life a little bit more comfortable, so to speak. So it's not so much in the sense that she would be free like she was, but it's more so that, he's trying to train her and teach her how to survive. And of course, they're playing this board game, which is sort of symbolic. You got white and black, the light and the darkness and whatnot. And this is also, sort of how she feels because she has all of these mixed emotions. And so we go back to Mizu and Ringo, and of course now Ringo has met Swordfather, and they have a lot of really good back and forth as well. And it was really cool to see Ringo actually, interacting with Swordfather, and it was also really good to see Mizu here as well. And one thing that I really liked was that, Mitsu and Swordfather has a lot of really great dialogue in this episode, along with Ringo as well. And the funniest thing, and actually something that we actually learn here as well, is that we learned that Ringo or Swordfather asks Ringo, how come you're injured, with your hands, and he basically straight out asks him, was it an accident or is it birth? And Ringo says that he was like this since birth, so that sort of fills in the story for us as well as to why, he has no hands. So I guess it was sort of like a birth deformity, so to speak, and that's why he doesn't have any hands. And so Ringo asks him the same thing about his vision. Was it an accident or was he born that way? And basically, Swordfather says, well, it went from fire, so I'm guessing it must have been the art and the craft of making swords, maybe, or maybe he literally got too close to fire and burnt them out. But either way, it seems like it's more of an accident. It doesn't appear like he was actually born that way. It just seems like it was an accident, or it was the cause of something. And so we end up coming to a really really funny scene here where Mitsu is outside now. She's starting to recover quite well, and Ringo and Swordfather are walking around. Ringo really starts to shadow Swordfather in this episode, and Swordfather doesn't really mind that he's shadowing him, but he does get a little bit annoyed with how much Ringo talks, and so he actually makes a comment to him at some point in this scene where he's like, you should learn silence, and Ringo actually says, my father said that. My father loved silence. So it's just a really funny interaction between them two, and it was also really funny that he said that about his father as well. So I guess his father must have been a little bit annoyed of him as well. But it was really funny. It was just a really funny back and forth, and it was really funny that Ringo was actually shadowing him during the whole episode. And so we finally see Tigan now. Tigan is up and walking around, but he is still very much injured. And there's a scene, in fact, where Mizu sort of even wants to duel him later on. I mean, not literally hurt him, but just like a play duel, practice duel. And he actually admits to her that he's not able to because he's in too much pain. And she actually says to him, well, pain is good. So that means he's healing, he is recovering, but he's in no shape, to fight or anything like that. And so we come back to Akemi then, and Akemi is out going around inside of like this carriage, which is being carried by a bunch of men, and she's basically going around the city and seeing all the city, all the different areas, and she's just out and about the town. And she ends up coming across Kamachi, who of course was the owner, or Kamachi, I think was her name, who ends up, she used to be the owner of the brothel that Akemi used to actually work at. And Akemi ends up, interacting with all these prostitutes and everyone that she had already known, and actually people that she had actually grown quite fond of, which you'll learn in this episode, because she'll actually end up offering all these people a job of safety and security and peace, where they won't have to be selling their bodies and continuing in that line of work of prostitution. But first, she goes and approaches them and basically reveals to them that this huge wedding that's coming is actually for her, and she's marrying into this certain family. And there was also a lot of really good dialogue here as well, especially for character development, because Kamachi and the other prostitutes really, I think, helps Akemi figure out a few things here, because a lot of the prostitutes are kind of like, well, we wouldn't even, we would love to have that type of life. Like, it's great that she doesn't have to be a prostitute. It's great that she doesn't have to have a life on the road. She's always going to be clean and wealthy and healthy. And so I think that makes Akemi sort of see a different side of the marriage, rather than just, straight up not wanting anything to do with it. It sort of opens her eyes and gives her a different perspective. Kamachi tells her as well. Kamachi basically says, if you want to be in control of your life, sorry, she says, then just take control. And so this was, so a combination between Kamachi and also Saki. It was a lot of character development for Akemi, because she gets to see two sides of the puzzle. You got, on one hand, you got the people telling her that she should just do what makes her happy, and then on the other hand, you got someone who's telling her to not cause waves and just sort of, not necessarily settle, but sort of, just sort of go along with it and try to make the best out of a bad situation, so to speak. And so she sort of takes both of those interpretations with her as the episode goes on. She takes both of those perceptions and sort of almost combines them to do her own thing. And so then we go back to Mizu, and of course Mizu has her sword broken here now. If you can remember from the last episode, Fowler ended up shooting her, and an extra bullet hit her sword, breaking it up and cracking it and shattering it. And then, of course, the bullet ended up going into her shoulder. So now she it doesn't have a sword, and so every warrior, every samurai needs to have a sword, and so she is going to try her best to basically melt down the steel and start over and recreate a sword for herself to use, because you can't be a samurai without a sword. And so here I really like these this little bit of interaction between her and Sword Father as well, because she actually ends up failing. She tries to basically, she really tries to melt down the sword and whatnot, but she's just simply not able to, and so she ends up failing. But what I liked about this scene is the little bit of interaction that she had with Sword Father. He basically tells her that she's not the same girl that she used to be. Because Mizu says something along the lines about "remember when I was a little girl" or something like that, and then he excuse me, and then he looks at her and says, "Well, you're not that same little girl, because that little girl would be afraid of who you are now." And so it's a really, just that one line alone shows sort of the life and the life choices that Mizu has made. Once upon a time, especially during the beginning of the series, we really, really pitied her. But then we got to that episode where she started making all these silly, dumb decisions. So when she comes here, Sword Father ends up sort of getting her back on track and reminding her who she was before everything. And plus, not to mention the fact that Tigan is constantly, especially by the end of this episode, Tigan has a really good back and forth with her as well, telling her that she's dishonorable, but we'll get to that. And so this obviously inspires Mizu to want to do better, and she asks, basically asks Allfather, or Sword Father, sorry, how does he do it? And he just says, "I wake up every morning, I light a fire, and I try to make a sword." And so this starts another cool montage where she ends up going out and creating her own massive pit for a fire, where she's going to have her own fire, and now she's going to attempt to recreate her own sword. Now, in the meantime, once nightfall comes, Tigan ends up coming out here, and he's exploring this old town in which him and Mizu actually grew up in. Well, he grew up in the town, whereas Mizu sort of hung out with Swordfather because Mizu obviously was rejected and was considered a demon and very evil, and so Mizu never actually really got to grow up in town, whereas Tigan did. But this was actually really sort of a very sad flashback, because we learn here that Tigan was one of the people that were very mean to Mizu, because we go back into the flashback and you see a young Mizu running away because there's a group of children actually throwing rocks at Mizu, which is obviously not okay. And then, of course, the camera sort of zooms in and sort of, ponders on this character, and if you look at the hairline, the hairstyle, it makes me think that this is very likely Tigan. And so this was Tigan when he was a child, and he used to participate in throwing rocks at Mizu, and really just, being a part of the problem. I guess he would be going along with her being a demon and whatnot and being evil. And so it was really sort of a heartwarming, or really a really sad moment, because everything that Mizu is after doing for him now when she's an adult just goes to show the kind of person, maybe she's not as evil as he thought she was. So now he still doesn't know either. I don't think he knows that she's a woman. I'm not 100% sure about that part yet, but I do think that by the end of this episode, or very soon, I think he'll figure it out because of the scene that they had, but I'm not 100% sure. And so, once again, we get some really cool back and forth here with Ringo and Swordfather. They're still discussing their lives, and once again talking about their, sort of their disabilities and whatnot. And he's really just teaching Ringo and basically how to be a good apprentice, so to speak. And he sort of, I think, helps mend Ringo and Mizu's relationship, even though it was never totally broken. There was moments that were very fractured. It never breaks, but it's fractured because of Mizu's decision not to help Akemi a couple episodes back. And so, in the meantime, Mitsu ends up trying to melt all the steel inside of this new forge that she's built, and of course she is not successful. And so when she takes the ashes and all the hard stuff off the sword, you see that the blade is still in perfect condition. Now it's also important to remember all the way back to the first episode, or the second episode, I believe, or no, the first episode, when we got the flashback of her making that sword to begin with. She really struggled to make it. It was really hard to melt down this mineral from the asteroid rock or whatever it was that meteorite that landed. And so, there's no reason to think that it won't be difficult now as well. So she ends up failing, but she doesn't give up. She just sort of stops right here for now, and then she goes back into the house, where we have another very interesting back and forth between her and Tigan. Tigan gives her these really good, tasty, delicate, I guess, type of, I don't even know what it is, dumpling or shrimp or something like that, some form of Japanese food. And he tells Mizu that this is considered to be really good. It's a really high quality food. And he asks her, did you ever try it before? And she says, no, because I was a dog, remember? I used to eat scraps. and once again, it was just a really cool disconnect, but also connection that they had between each other, because Tigan did not experience that, but he was a part of the problem. He was the one that caused her, or he was one of the people that caused her to feel this way. And so now we finally get to the scene then where Tigan and Mitsu are sort of being a little bit playful, and it was really cool to see that, really fun to see that. I actually think that Tigan and Mitsu would be a pretty cool couple. They'd definitely be a power couple. They're both excellent warriors and excellent fighters, and this is where I think he probably figures out that she's a woman, but I'm not 100% sure, because while they're sort of rolling around, he does end up getting a little bit excited, but then also Shibi's like sort of sat on top of him. So I mean, I would assume that he would be able to tell if she's on top of him. Like, he would be able to feel everything. You know what I mean? So I would assume that he knows after this that she's a woman, but I could be completely wrong. And maybe he still doesn't know, because he does refer to Mizu as a he later on as well. So then we come back to Akemi, and this is just brutal when we see this scene here, and we learn that the future Akemi's mother-in-law ends up feeding her literally the bird that she helped freed. They killed the bird, and then they cooked the bird and ends up feeding it to Akemi. But because Akemi is so strong-willed and she's going to do whatever it takes just to prove a point, just to prove that she's not weak, she goes ahead and eats the bird just for the sake of, like I said, proving a point. And just to really rub it in after the meal, Akemi ends up getting presented with two more birds of the exact same type, the exact same type of bird that she had tried to free, and they actually present her two more. And not only that, but while they're giving it to her, they tell her, hey, this is two more birds that are fresh for you to eat for both your dinner and your supper, or something like that, they say. And it's just so, like, it's just such a, like a punch in the gut for Akemi, because she's so not like them, not anymore. Like, maybe she was once upon a time, but she's not like that now. And I really felt bad for Akemi, because that was really such an evil thing to do. But it also illustrates the type of family that she's going to be marrying into, and it shows the type of people that they are. So in the meantime, we come back now to Mizu, and Mizu is pretty well naked. And she's putting all these Japanese characters all over her body. So I'm guessing this is some kind of Japanese prayer or like song or prayer, or some form of cultural like ritual or ceremony type thing that she's doing. And one thing that I really loved about this episode is that she ends up having to have help from Ringo. And so she goes to Ringo and she turns around and she takes off her clothing, and she's actually naked here, and she tells Ringo that there's some things that I just simply can't do alone. And I think there's a lot more to this scene than what just meets the eye. I think this scene has a lot of gravity to it, because for one, she's naked, and this does a lot of things. One, it shows that she trusts Ringo, because whenever anybody's naked, they're always vulnerable, they're exposed. It's a very vulnerable feeling. It's a feeling that you don't really want to have unless it's with somebody that you really trust. Even if you're married or with a spouse, the first time you're naked in front of somebody, sometimes it can feel a little weird, a little awkward. But what this does in terms of their relationship, it really shows Ringo, that she really does trust him to the point where she's willing to make herself exposed and feel vulnerable. So to me, that really seals their relationship. To me, it shows just how much she really does care about him, and then also that he respects her enough to where he will do it, but he'll also be respectful about it. So I just thought it was great character development. And then we see that he does do it, and of course they show her whole body. I won't here, obviously, for keep it PG, but they do show her whole body, and he does put the entire prayer or whatever it is, whatever cultural thing it is. He puts it all over her body for her. So I just thought that that was a really good. Well, one, I thought it was a really good choice as a great way to sort of mend their bond and really, take their relationship to the next level. They really are like an apprentice and a master here in this scene because they're both participating in the ceremony. He's sort of helping her with creating the sword and whatnot. So I thought that that was really cool and really appropriate and absolutely necessary. And so, in the meantime, the next day we go back to Fowler, the White Devil, and his partner, and basically, I think his partner is getting a little bit concerned because the guns that Fowler has promised were not down on the wharf. He promised that there would be a bunch of stuff coming in on boats, and they weren't there. But the truth be told is that Fowler actually already has the guns, but he has them brought in and disguised as furniture and pieces of furniture and pieces of the chess game and stuff. And so he ends up. Taking all the pieces and putting it together, and in the meantime, he has four people which are supposed to be condemned people which are in jail and they're most likely sentenced to die. And he does this to show the power of his weapons, and he has one of them have a bow and arrow. And the guy shoots the arrow at Fowler and also at the Japanese partner, and of course the arrow does not even come close, and so Fowler ends up using the gun that he just put together, using the furniture and the different pieces and even like the chess pieces, and he shoots the gun and he easily kills the guy who had the bow and arrow. And so this is excuse me, showing Fowler exercising the power that he has with these rifles and the amount of power that he's bringing into Japan and the straight up advantage that he would have over any samurai or any archer. And he's really reshaping Japan and showing to his Japanese partner that there's really nothing that they can't do or overcome with these new weapons. And he also actually kills another partner in that scene as well, because there's like a bunch of them that are partners, and he ends up killing one of them. And so then they go over and they show the army of one of the people that he killed, and now he tells his Japanese partner that this army is now his to command to help them with the takeover. And so, as we approach the end of the episode, we see Ringo and Mizu now officially heading out, and Mizu is now heading out for the final assault. She is going to try her best to take on Fowler to kill the White Demon and basically put an end to the chaos and get her revenge, at least for that one, for Fowler, for that White Devil, because she still has two more that she has to get as well. But I think it's pretty safe to say they're not going to be in this season. They'll be in the next season, at least one of them, anyways. And it was just really cool to see, to see them going away. And Ringo's really excited, to go on this adventure. They both sort of make an agreement here. Not literally, but you can tell that they both have an agreement to help each other. They have a plan, and they're saying goodbye to the Sword Father. And Ringo is really excited and he can't wait to get on the adventure. And then for the very end of the episode, really for the most part, we end up seeing Akemi, and she gets together Kamachi and all the prostitutes that worked at that brothel, and she offers them all a job, and they all accept, and she basically tells them that here they'll have warmth, safety, food, comfort, all that stuff, because she'll take care of them and she'll hire them as her servants. And so they can't wait to get off the street, so obviously they're all very excited. And one of them ends up blowing the roast and revealing to Akemi that she knows about the plan for Fowler to come and kill and overtake the Shogun. And she basically tells her this because she feels so guilty for the way that she treated Akemi and stuff, the way she sort of slandered her. And now Akemi is doing this good deed, so she ends up opening up to Akemi. So Akemi takes that prostitute to her father, and they tell the Shogun about the plan of Fowler and them coming to overtake the land. And it turns out then that the big reveal, the big shocker, is that her father is actually in on the plan and actually throws the prostitute over the balcony, making it look like it's suicide. Looks like she jumped off the balcony. And this is the final scene of the episode, which is Akemi, and she is in just shock and awe and amazement that her father was actually in on it. And now she realizes that she cannot really trust anyone other than herself. And that's basically where the episode ends. And so I guess you could say most of this episode really was just a build up for the finale. You can sort of see now where all the stories are going. You can see, excuse me, you can see that Mizu and Ringo are now heading out to, obviously Mizu and Ringo are going to be basically the big defense for the Shogun. Maybe not so much Ringo. I feel like Ringo is going to be sort of like, he's going to be there sort of as like the getaway car. So once Mizu is actually able to kill Fowler, I think that Ringo will be waiting somewhere with a carriage or something like that. Like he'll be more of the escape route, whereas Mizu will actually be the warrior, obviously going in to fight. Obviously, Tigan is going to get sucked into somehow because he's gone to warn the Shogun now about this upcoming takeover. But what he doesn't know is that the Shogun actually already knows. So it seems to me like Tigan could very well be walking into a trap. And then on the other hand, then you have Akemi, and Akemi is going to be right in the middle of this, which no doubts will end up crossing over with Mizu and definitely Tigan again, their story. So I don't think that they were actually officially reunited. Excuse me. So I do think that they will be reunited here with this final battle. And it's going to be very interesting to see what their reactions are because, Tigan knows that Akemi is supposed to be getting married to this new family because Mizu told him that that's what was going to happen. And so he's going to obviously go and warn the Shogun and maybe even want to stop the wedding. And then, like I said, also Mitsu's going to be there. So it's just going to be, all the characters are going to end up being in this battle. So the question is anybody going to die? Or will Mitsu be able to actually kill Fowler? So there's a lot of questions still got to be answered, but you can see the setup. And I do appreciate that they had this episode a little bit slower because we had such an awesome fight sequence in the last episode. The choreography was so cool that, but at the same time, Mitsu and Tigan really got beat up, so they did really have to sort of slow down, take the time to rest, and basically get back, be able to get back on their feet, which makes me think as well that there must have been some time gone by. It's also spring now, the weather is really nice, it's spring, everything's coming back to life, so it must have been a little bit of a time gap as well. They would have needed time to recover and whatnot, so it'll be really exciting to see how it ends, and it's crazy to think that we're at the finale now after this, and I can't wait to see where it goes. So with that being said, folks, that's my review of episode 7 of Blue Eye Samurai. So let me know in the comment section below if you've seen this episode, and if you'd like to tell me why or why not. If you like this video, click that subscribe button, and until the next one, take care.